Everyone keeps saying Sherlock Holmes was some kind of genius, but I don't get the hype. I mean, solving crimes with a magnifying glass? How impressive could that really be?
Ah, so you think Holmes was overrated? That's interesting.
I'm just saying, he solved cases because people around him were probably clueless. Bet he never actually faced a real challenge.
Well, there was one time. A time he wasn't exactly the one in control. A woman, of all people, managed to do what no criminal mastermind ever could.
Wait, Holmes got outsmarted by a woman? Now I'm listening.
I thought you might be. You see, Holmes rarely spoke about emotions, but whenever he mentioned this particular person, there was a shift. A hesitation.
Who was she?
Ah, now that's the mystery. To Holmes, she was always just the woman. Not a name, not a villain, not a victim. Just the woman. And that, my friend, is where our story begins.
All right, you've got me. Tell me everything.
Well, it all started on a foggy evening at 221B Baker Street. Watson was there, of course. And then, a knock at the door.
A knock at the door? Let me guess. Some rich aristocrat with a missing diamond or something.
Not exactly. Watson was visiting Holmes that evening, just catching up. The fire was warm, the tea was hot. And then came the knock. A heavy, deliberate knock.
So, someone important?
Very. When Mrs. Hudson brought up the visitor's card, Holmes took one look and knew it was serious. The man who entered was tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a mask. Not something you see every day in London.
A mask sounds dramatic. What was he hiding?
Well, Holmes, being Holmes, didn't need to see his face to know who he was, or at least what kind of person he was. The man's clothes, his mannerisms. Holmes immediately deduced he was someone of high rank.
Wait, so he guessed that just by looking at him?
Not guessed. Observed. The visitor's boots were bespoke, his accent had a distinct Germanic lilt, and the envelope he carried was of the finest paper, with a Bohemian seal. Holmes simply put the pieces together.
All right, that's kind of cool. So who was he?
After a bit of back and forth, the visitor removed his mask and revealed himself. The King of Bohemia.
The king? Okay, this just got interesting.
Oh, it was about to get very interesting, because the king had a problem, and her name was Irene Adler.
So, the King of Bohemia shows up at Baker Street in a mask, no less. What on earth could a king need from a detective?
That's what Watson wondered too, but Holmes already knew. It had to be a matter of reputation, something scandalous. And sure enough, the king admitted as much.
What kind of scandal are we talking about?
A woman, of course.
Of course.
The king was about to marry a princess from Scandinavia, but there was a complication. Before this royal engagement, the king had an affair with an opera singer, and not just any opera singer, Irene Adler.
Let me guess, she had something on him?
More than something. She had a photograph of the two of them together, one that, if revealed, would destroy the king's engagement, and possibly cause a scandal big enough to shake Europe.
Why didn't he just, buy her off?
He tried. Money, bribes, even attempts to steal it. But Adler was always a step ahead. Every time the king made a move, she countered.
So he called in Holmes, because if anyone could outsmart her...
Exactly. But as Holmes was about to find out, Irene Adler wasn't your typical adversary.
All right, so Holmes is on the case. What's his first move?
Holmes never rushed. First, he needed information. The next morning, he took a walk. Straight to Irene Adler's house.
Just like that? Knocked on her door?
Not quite. Holmes never shows up as himself. Not when he's gathering intel. He disguised himself as a simple working man. A shabby, out-of-work groom, to be precise. Completely unrecognizable.
I gotta admit, that's clever. So, what did he find?
He observed everything. Her routine, her servants, the layout of the house. He learned that she had only one confidant, a man named Godfrey Norton.
And who was he?
A lawyer. And Holmes noticed something odd. That same morning, Norton arrived at Adler's house in a hurry. Then, after a short while, Irene left, also in a rush.
Sounds suspicious.
Holmes, of course, followed them. To his surprise, he ended up at a church.
A church? Wait, were they?
Yes. Holmes, purely by chance, witnessed their wedding. Irene Adler and Godfrey Norton were married that very morning.
What? But Wasn't she supposed to be holding onto that photograph to blackmail the king? Why would she get married?
Ah, Holmes wondered the same thing. But now the game had changed, and Holmes knew he had to act fast.
So, Irene Adler just got married and Holmes is still supposed to find this photograph? That complicates things.
Exactly. Holmes knew the clock was ticking. Newlyweds don't usually stick around long. If she was planning to leave town, the photograph would go with her. So, he came up with a plan.
Let me guess, another disguise?
Naturally. But this time, it was bold. He decided to stage an accident. That afternoon, Holmes disguised himself as a clergyman, and as Adler returned home from her wedding, he put the plan into motion.
What kind of accident are we talking about?
A street scuffle. As Adler's carriage approached her house, a group of rough-looking men started a fight right in front of her door. It looked chaotic, dangerous. But of course, it was all orchestrated.
Holmes arranged the whole thing?
Down to the last detail. And just as expected, when the fight broke out, Irene's instinct was to protect herself. She rushed to her front door, and when she did...
She revealed the hiding place, didn't she?
Exactly. In moments of panic, people instinctively go to what they treasure most. Holmes, watching from the chaos, saw her glance towards a hidden panel above the mantelpiece.
That's genius. So Holmes had her?
Not quite. He knew where the photograph was, but he couldn't just take it, not with Adler watching. So, after the staged fight was over, Holmes, the clergyman, pretended to be injured. Adler, kind as ever, invited him into her home to recover.
Wait, she actually invited him in after all that?
That's the brilliance of it. Holmes knew how to play on her compassion. Inside her house, he now knew exactly where the photograph was hidden. And he left that evening, quietly, with a plan to return the next morning and claim it.
But something went wrong, didn't it?
Oh, Alex, you're starting to think like Holmes. Yes, something went very wrong indeed.
All right, so Holmes thinks he's won, he's got the hiding place, he's got the plan. What happens next?
The next morning, Holmes, Watson, and the King of Bohemia all arrived at Irene Adler's house, ready to retrieve the photograph. The king was anxious but confident. After all, who could outwit Sherlock Holmes?
Yeah, I'm guessing that confidence didn't last long.
Not long at all. They knocked on her door, and a maid answered. Calmly, she informed them that Irene Adler had left the country that morning with her new husband.
Wait, she was gone just like that?
Gone. Holmes, the great detective, outmaneuvered. But of course, he didn't give up. He insisted on checking the hiding place above the mantelpiece.
And the photograph was gone too, wasn't it?
Yes. Instead, there was a letter addressed to Sherlock Holmes.
She knew he was onto her.
She did. The letter explained everything. Irene Adler had recognized Holmes the day before. She wasn't fooled by his clergyman disguise. She wrote that, knowing the king would never leave her alone, she and her husband decided to leave England for good.
So she beat him. The great Sherlock Holmes, outsmarted by a woman.
Not just any woman, the woman. That's how Holmes always referred to her afterward. And the king? Well, he was relieved. Irene promised she would never use the photograph against him. She didn't want revenge or money. She just wanted her freedom.
Honestly, respect. She played the game and won.
Exactly. Holmes didn't often lose, but when he did, he lost to the best.
So, after all that, Holmes just accepted the loss?
He did. And that's what makes this story so unique. Holmes wasn't bitter. If anything, he admired her. He even kept a photograph of her, not out of sentimentality, but as a symbol of the one woman who truly outsmarted him.
That's kind of poetic. The detective who solves everything except her.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that even the most brilliant mind can be surprised. Holmes learned that logic and deduction are powerful, but human nature, with its emotions and instincts, can't always be predicted.
And Irene Adler, she just disappears into history, living her life on her own terms.
Yes, she didn't need revenge, fame, or wealth. She simply won and walked away.
You know, I think that's what makes this story so compelling. It's not just about the mystery, it's about respect, intelligence, and knowing when to let go.
That's why Irene Adler was always the woman to Sherlock Holmes. Not because of romance, but because of respect. And that, my friend, is what makes A Scandal in Bohemia unforgettable.
Subscribe for more content.